All right, well, welcome everyone. Very excited to have you all here today to talk about leadership beliefs. My name is Mary Axelsen. I'm the founder of WeMaax Consulting, and my firm focuses on business and organizational consulting and strategy. And I'm here with my partner of human-centered leadership, Amy. And we're going to jump in and do some introductions, talk about how we're going to flow through the conversation today. But we're excited to talk about how leadership beliefs need to and are in the process of transforming as we are leading and operating in a post-pandemic world. So Amy, I'll throw it over to you to do a brief introduction, and then we'll go over to Megan and Janet.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. So I'm Amy Wood. I'm a psychologist based in Maine. And Mary and I, a couple of years ago, got together for dinner. We've been colleagues for a really long time. And we realized that through the course of the pandemic, and especially now in our hybrid world, leadership has changed dramatically. It's not the way it was. And we came up with 6 beliefs that are still widely practiced and worked better, but not really well before the pandemic, and now really don't work at all. And then we came up with 6 new beliefs that we believe work much better. And we're going to take 3 of those beliefs and contrast them with the before and after beliefs. And then we're going to ask our special guests here, Megan U. Schneider and Janet Riley, who are both leaders Mary and I admire very much, to ask for their take on these beliefs, what they think. And they'll also be giving us personal examples of how they have taken these beliefs and run with them, these new beliefs.
All right. Thanks, Amy. So Megan, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan U. Schneider, and I actually started out my career as a chemical, environmental, and civil engineer. So I often joke that I studied chemical engineering because I really appreciated process optimization. And I quickly learned that my passion centered around people. And so throughout my career, I've spent a lot of time involved in how we optimize people-driven processes and how we empower people to be the best that they can be so that their organizations can thrive. And so most recently, I just completed my doctoral dissertation with the University of Pennsylvania Chief Learning Officer program. And I studied how significant life experiences relate to leader identity and adult development in the workplace. So really excited to be a part of this conversation and draw from my nearly 20 years of experience in the workplace. Thank you.
Right. Thanks,
Thanks,
Megan.
Megan.
Janet?
I'm Janet Riley, and I currently run my own communications and organizational development consulting firm, but I've spent my career as a media spokesperson, and it's been primarily in the food and meat industry. I was the spokesperson for the United States meat industry for 28 years. Then I worked in corporate life in Toronto, and I've also worked in healthcare and in the environment. But I'm really enjoying this next chapter of life, focusing on my own business and in the organizational development space.
Yeah, that's great. Well, as Amy said, we're excited to have you here to have this conversation and to take your lived experiences as a whole person and be able to speak to them from a human-centered leader perspective. So Amy did a really nice job of summarizing, the purpose of the meeting. And so what we're going to do as a next step is we're going to take 3 of those human-centered leadership beliefs and walk through them and ask you specific questions related to them. So we'll say, all right, this is the antiquated belief that's wreaking havoc in our work environment as we try to hold on to a belief system that no longer works. Here's the human-centered leadership belief, and then we'll ask you questions related to it. So Amy, I think you're going to kick us off with the first one.
Yeah, so let's start with the first belief that really is causing disruption in a bad way in the workforce right now. Again, these beliefs we're going to bring up that don't work anymore have been in place for a really long time, and we're all about changing them. So that old belief that we want to change is success means I must excel at all my responsibilities while controlling the work of others. This is a belief among leaders that really had to change during the pandemic because we lost that ability to micromanage to a great extent because we were working at home, we were working virtually. And what we learned from that is that this new belief really leads to greater employee engagement and greater productivity. And that is, I operate best when I live in my purpose, further develop strengths, and empower others, empower others to do their work in a way that works for them. I don't have to control everybody. So let's start. Let me ask you, Megan, that belief, I operate best when I live in my purpose, further develop strengths, and empower others. Do you see that in the people you're consulting with? Do you see that in yourself? And in what ways? What examples do you have to share?
Absolutely. And so I see that in my day job. I work for Accenture in client account leadership. Also see that in my role as an elected board member. I'm on the board for the Municipal Water District of Orange County. And I think particularly in leadership roles, you know, we get to where we are because we work hard. And we work really hard, become really good at the things that we do, and that elevates us to a position of leadership. But really, in order to scale your impact and be able to lead effectively, it's about empowering the people that are on your team and really about sharing the success with the people that you work with. And I think a fundamental belief is, I hear a lot of leaders often say, I want to delegate, but people aren't stepping up, or it would be so amazing if I didn't have to do it all. And I think it's easy to say those things, but it does take a lot of just self-reflection and really looking in the mirror and being clear about what are your core beliefs, where those become your go-to, you know, excuses, because that is what they are, right?
Yes, you're right.
And so oftentimes we want to delegate, but hold enough control and enough information where they still need us. And it's really important to look in the mirror and say, why am I doing that? Is it an insecurity? Is it a fear? Is it a belief? Perhaps it's a belief I tell myself that no one else can do it the way that I can. Or is it simply because we're afraid that, you know, if somebody else does that, what does that mean about my skills and abilities? And so all of those things could be lies that we tell ourselves and lies that we choose to believe as truths. And so I really love this human-centered leadership belief of, we operate at our best when we know our purpose, and knowing your purpose can be a journey, and it could be an evolving journey, and it takes repeated reflection and really understanding what are your core beliefs, what are your core values, and what is your core passion and purpose. Then it's really about leaning into your strengths, and as a leader, learning to help others develop their strengths. A good leader isn't just about themselves, it's about their entire team. And so that gets into the empowerment. So I really appreciate this one.
Yeah, I appreciate too, especially what you said about people using their old beliefs as an excuse. You know, well, this is the way I've always thought. This is the way it's always been. I can't do it differently. And Mary and I talk a lot about how it's really hard to change beliefs when they're deeply ingrained, as most beliefs are. And you really have to do it in small steps. And it takes a lot of courage to work through the fear of that. So thank you for bringing that up.
I also want to mention, Jenny just put a really great resource in the chat as well, Confident Humility by Adam Grant. So Jenny, thank you for sharing that.
He's my favorite.
Yeah, the book is Think Again, but the concept he brings out so beautifully is confident humility, which is this new way that I think leaders have to move forward into this new behavior that you're talking about, this different mindset where they're confident but humble, to have this component of empowerment, of listening, of gathering perspective from others and empowering them to go forward. So love it.
I think the other thing, Megan, that you just brought up for me is sometimes we may have a desire to lead in a certain way, but who we report to has different expectations of how we lead than what our desires are. And so, for example, I can remember a time where I worked for somebody who expected me to be deeply in the details. And so when he came to me and asked me a question about something that I may have delegated and been the responsibility of somebody else, and at a high level, I understood what was going on, but I didn't have the depth of detail that he was looking for. Right. So it put me in a really difficult position, as far as how did I want to lead as a leader? How did my leader expect me to lead?
Yeah.
So we have those environmental conditions that we're working into that we have to navigate in addition to our own beliefs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Janet, what do you think about this belief?
I think the opposite of command and control is servant leadership. And I'm a big believer in servant leadership. And I think that COVID really challenged all of us in so many ways. And as leaders, it challenged us to be better servant leaders. We had to be. We had to serve our people who were dealing with situations they couldn't have imagined. Talk about something that caught us by surprise. And suddenly people had no childcare. They had maybe their elder care responsibilities fell on them. All sorts of things were disrupted. And so suddenly home and work bled in together, and we had to really do some out of the box thinking and find ways to flex, to support. But servant leadership is all about building up your team, serving your team so that the team in totality will be better and stronger. And you talked, Megan, about the fear of letting go, the fear, some people are afraid that if they don't control, they'll make a mistake. And I learned a lot of management lessons leading Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts is a servant leadership organization, and we were told not to tell the scouts what decision to make in the moment. We would train them, but then they had to use their own decision, and you had to let them make the wrong decision, because sometimes making the wrong decision is the best lesson of all. If you had a scout who said, I think I go north, and you knew that you were supposed to go south, you went ahead and went north with them. As long as they weren't going to be injured by going north, you went north, and they never forgot about it, and they learned how to use their compass better next time. So I think that as leaders, we need to allow people to fail sometimes too. I think that on rare occasions, there's a place for command and control leadership. I'm in crisis management. I've managed a lot of crises, and I had less time to be super supportive and as nice as I wanted to be in a crisis. But the rest of the time, I think that serving others is the best way. And I think the literature documents it well.
Great, thank you. All right, well, why don't we move on to the second belief? And the second belief is around recognition. And the antiquated belief that we believe is wreaking havoc right now in the environment is I am rewarded when I do what is expected of me and don't challenge the status quo. The human-centered leadership belief is I am fulfilled when I push progressive agendas and smash through barriers. Okay? So sometimes we're afraid, right, to challenge others, to create conflict. And when we have something within us that is really our truth, and we don't share it and we keep it inside, it is also an indicator of what leads to physical and mental illnesses, right? Because we're holding that discontentment and that contentment inside of us. Janet, I'm going to go to you first this time. Can you share with us a time when you had to move through that discomfort associated with challenging others, stepping into that conflict, and how did you do it? Like, what tactics did you utilize, and how do you help others with it?
Yeah, there's an example that really clearly comes to mind. And I was fortunate to be in an environment with a leader who supported me in stepping out of that box. For many years, I worked with Temple Grandin, who some of you may know. She's considered the world's most accomplished autistic person. She's a professor of animal welfare at Colorado State University. So I was in a fairly conservative meat industry, and these people had raised livestock, they had processed livestock, they knew how to do it, and I had never done it. I had a journalism degree, so who was I? But I interviewed Temple Grandin back when she wasn't the celebrity she is today at all. This was in the early 90s. And then I was fascinated by her way of thinking because it was different. And one day in the mid-90s, she came to me and said, I was just in a bunch of meat plants in Canada, and I really am thinking that we can evaluate animal welfare by counting things. I think we could count how many times they move. We could count how many times they squeal, how many times they slip when they're walking. And this was definitely different than anybody had ever, advocated before. And I thought about it and it made sense. And I had a great boss, and I walked into the management team and I said, Temple Grandin thinks we can measure animal welfare by counting things. We can count vocalizations. And somebody who had actually, raised prize pigs and prize cattle at the county fair said, Janet, you actually think we're going to count moves? And I'm not quite sure how I did it, but I looked at him, and we laugh about this to this day. I said, yes, I think we're going to count moves. Temple says it works, and I think it'll work. And my boss created that environment where I could take that risk and said, Janet, go for it. And so we wrote the first ever animal welfare audit and began counting moves and counting slips and counting all sorts of things in plants so we could figure out, the state of welfare among the animals and in our facilities. And suddenly McDonald's caught wind of it. McDonald's said, we like this. We're going to require everybody to do this who supplies McDonald's. And as McDonald's goes, so goes Wendy's and Burger King and all the other big companies. And it was like a domino effect. And I look back on that, and I don't quite know what possessed me to have the confidence to make that statement in that meeting, but I think it had to do with having a leader who believed in me and who supported me and made it safe for me to introduce an idea like that. And I've never forgotten it.
That's a great story.
Yeah, really inspiring.
Thank you. What about you, Megan?
I love that story, Janet. Thank you so much. As you all were talking, it also made me just think about, one of my favorite cartoons is the lemmings all jumping off a cliff.
Yes.
And I think we often like to revert to this belief that we all want to be in harmony together, think the same things, sing kumbaya, but truly in a safe and healthy environment, we're able to have healthy dissent. Not because we want to debate or disagree with one another, but because it helps keep the whole group safe. And it also helps keep the whole group moving forward in the right direction so that we're not all jumping off a cliff together. And so ideally, you want to be in a healthy space where where healthy dissent is acknowledged and encouraged. But if you're not in that space, it's also important to be able to, as a leader or even as somebody within that group, create that space for those conversations. And so if you recognize somebody who, as Mary talked about, is experiencing stress and maybe even mental and physical health illness, pull them aside and create space for that conversation. It's almost like creating a little vent to let the pressure relieve itself. But in a group setting, and particularly as a leader, I think it's important to help create that space for the group by asking questions, not by, saying, I adamantly disagree, you're wrong, but asking questions to get people to be curious and asking questions so that people start thinking about, what else am I not thinking about? And the other guarantee is if you're sensing that, there's somebody else who's also sensing or experiencing it. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned early on in my career is it's not always that obvious that other people are also going through the same emotions and the same feelings until you create that space to verbalize it and talk about it. And talking about it from a place of curiosity and from a place of goodwill and true interest is what drives change.
I love that. When the both of you were speaking, one of the things that came to mind for me is creating an environment of curiosity. And that, that allowing people to really speak and verbalize their ideas. And Jenny had put a comment in the chat about courage as well and leadership. And I think that sometimes we have this belief that that courage means being fearless. And that's not true. We can hold fear and courage at the same time. We can be brave and afraid and anxious. Like we can hold all of those emotions. And I don't know if there's ever a time that I took a risk in my life that I also didn't feel a lot of fear. But I went back to myself and that belief that I had inside of me. I found those safe people that the two of you were just talking about, created a tribe to help me move through that so that I ultimately, achieved what I was looking for in my life. And I think this conversation takes us like beautifully, Amy, to our next belief around, so I'll let you take it from here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as we end our, like, I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
As we go through the next few minutes of our conversation.
Yeah, so this is a good one. So the old belief that is still prominent, that just creates a lot of stress for people and problems, is this belief that mistakes and missteps are signs of incompetence. The new belief, the human-centered leadership that Mary and I advocate, is experimentation and agility. And I think Janet and Megan, you've both shown this already today. That experimentation and agility are integral to driving meaningful results. So Janet, how have you seen that play out in your career and with the people you've led?
I'm going to go back to the same boss. I'm realizing how lucky I was to have this particular boss. I think that you need to experiment and be agile so you can take a risk, because not taking a risk can be a missed opportunity. Sure, it could fail. Sure, it could hopefully do only minimal damage, but if you never risk, you never gain. And I was once faced with a media inquiry from the Jon Stewart show, of all people, and they wanted me to come on and talk about hot dogs. And it was incredibly risky. I mean, what a high profile opportunity. But what if it went badly? And I was paralyzed with fear. I was just paralyzed. And I remember distinctly wringing my hands in my boss's office and saying, I'm just afraid. I'm just so afraid it's going to go wrong. And he looked at me and he said, I think you're up to it. You go do the show. If you succeed, you get the credit. If you fail, I'll say I made you do it. Deal? And I said, deal. And it was a huge hit. But he transferred his confidence to me. And he gave me the permission to fail. And he gave me the cover I needed. And what a brilliant thing he said in the moment. It was an unplanned, spontaneous conversation. But it succeeded. And if you create an environment like that, I was just reading that I'm a facilitator. I use Post-it notes all the time on the walls. Post-it notes were created by taking a risk and trying to create something that stuck permanently. And this was a failure, but the experimentation created a product that's so valued and so pervasive in offices. So I think it's so important to create that environment.
Yes. It definitely is. And I often tell people who are dealing with having to take a risk and feeling very afraid, I tell them that I love to read memoirs of people I respect. So people who are well regarded and well known. And there is not one memoir about someone I respect I've ever read that wasn't filled with repeated failures, mistakes, slip ups. And you just have to pick up and say, what can I learn from this? And keep going. And that's how we get where we are. So what about you, Megan? Do you have a story to tell regarding the value of mistakes?
So many things that come to mind. And as you all were talking, I was just thinking about, when we talk about luck and, people often say, oh, some people are just lucky, but scientifically it's been proven people who are viewed as lucky take more shots. And so there are more failures that they encounter, but also more wins. And, I think back to Janet's point, I think a lot of times we forget that failure is only catastrophic if we don't learn from it. And so if we take the opportunity to reflect on any perceived failure and take a lesson from it, take an insight from it, then really it's a lesson learned and not necessarily a failure. And I'm just trying to pick one now that my brain is going all over the place. But I think, you know, there are time and time again examples of, you know, mistakes and missteps. I said the wrong thing. I might have not done the best job, but those are all opportunities where I took a lesson and learned from it. And I think the other thing that really struck me as we were talking is, you know, as you talked about the Havoc belief and about mistakes and missteps being a sign of incompetence, it really reflects where our society is today. As a developed country, we're no longer in the Industrial Revolution where we're making widgets and you know, working from a Tayloristic standpoint. And so, yes, it's easy to not make mistakes when you're making the same thing over and over again and you're repeating the same
Yes.
actions over and over again. We're now in a world where we're all mostly involved in some form of knowledge work. And because of that, we really do have to embrace trying things and not knowing what the answers might be and being okay with not knowing what the solution is before we dive in and really recognizing you don't know anything until you try. And, you know, I think I shared even in just pursuing my doctorate, I grew up as an engineer. I had 2 degrees in engineering. I had never pursued a degree in education or organizational leadership, learning and change. And I thought going into that space, you know, going into that classroom, I was going to be surrounded by HR and learning and development professionals. And, you know, I had a lot of insecurities around what am I going to bring into the space as someone who's done a lot of that work informally, but has a degree that's on the wall that says I'm an engineer. And I think so much of us tie our identities around the work that we do, around the degrees that we have, the titles that we have. But I think especially as we lean more into a skills-based organizational culture throughout our industries, it's really about recognizing how do you take those lessons learned from all the failures and all the things that you've tried throughout your life, and how do you leverage that into becoming an effective leader?
Love that.
Yeah.
What a great closing. The two of
Yes.
you. Yeah. I'm just walking away from this conversation feeling so inspired.
Yes.
And also thank you for all the sharing of the resources as well throughout the conversation. Amy and I say all the time, we don't know what things mean to us when we don't know what we have the potential to learn from them unless we actually go out there and do them.
Right.
And so thank you for putting an exclamation point on that. So thank you for a great conversation. We will be having this again in a couple weeks where we talk about the next 3 beliefs that are a part of human-centered leadership. We have 2 other leaders that will be joining us, and we hope to see you there. And thank you for everyone who participated, and Janet and Megan especially. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And have a really good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.